have the force or capacity to be decolonial or anti-colonial or in some way interrupt the ongoing colonial story of Vancouver, of Canada, etc., etc. And so I invite you to experience what we're about to experience in that spirit. With that said, in terms of housekeeping, there's not too much to keep in mind. We have a washroom over here. Yeah. Also, of course, there'll be many books for sale. Those books can also be autographed, I believe. We had a short conversation about which pen was going to be the signing pen for the evening, and about 4 different pens were chosen. So we expect that some people will want to have their book signed. Other than that, we have a small quantity of beer and wine for after the show as well. So if that's your persuasion, we have that too. I've been asked to do a poem, which is not something that ever happens in this space, because usually, like, you know, my job is to sit there looking pretty in the back and selling you books and stuff. But yeah, I'm also a poet and spoken word artist, so I will do a little bit of that before I hand it over. It is my book. You know, it's good to come to work prepared. You know, I didn't expect to read, but you know, you always gotta carry your work with you in some way. So this is just my favorite poem in the collection. It's called Body, Anthem, and Prayer. I'm a black person. I'm also visibly physically disabled, and so for both of those reasons, my body is beautiful, but also carries a certain kind of, I don't know. My body is the sort of body that like people have projected upon for my whole life, and so it has sometimes become necessary for me to, think about self-care in some very deep ways and pray over my body. And so this is the most elaborate prayer that I can share with you today. It's called Body, Anthem, and Prayer. Oh body, rustle the air, bless dandelions with your long shadow, toss your reflected gaze into jars of honey, offer your fingertips like figs to the mouths of lovers, gather in your hair the ticker tape of cherry blossoms, give your scent to water, to a river, a tincture of your held breath. In every gesture, swim, make the chest a splintered seed, be a moonlight, a devotion tireless as winter. Be, if you must, a singular anthem, soften the brutally human, sing with the corvids instead. Body, I unleash you from mere puppetry of flesh, unspool you, unscorn you, unmake your map of bruise, blood and dance you, nectar you wholly, unghost you, conjure and mystique you, unmyth you, elastic your bones, luster you, incant your latent shades, mango scent you, lilac your hair, tender skin you, essential you in oils, anthem and voice you, intone you, spark you divine with songs. I untether you, body, from museum of race, unchain you from treadmill of capital, release you now into fields of marigold, the archways of sunflowers bending. Body, tired animal, I fill your mouth with water, blue silk you in spirals of wind. I'll stop there. Thank you. I've never had to make this particular transition before in this capacity, but join me in welcoming our 2 featured poets featured writers for the evening. What is your name?
Well, I'm Suzanne Hawks, and my whole body is full of chills. That was a benediction to start this beautiful circle. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me to do it. My pleasure.
My goodness. Thank you for asking him. Well, thank you. And may I ask where we can find your books, Brandon?
Oh, it's not about me. But
I know it's not about you. But since I asked...
you can find it at Massey Books, which is just on East Georgia. Yeah, you know where it is. Yeah.
Thank you. So grateful to all of you for showing up in support of Anahid and this book and the idea of belonging. How many people knew about Anahid prior to getting the invitation for tonight? I'm just curious about that. Yeah, maybe half or less than half of the people here. I'll say. Let's see. What do I want to say? I know. I know. I started comparing Anahit to Alice Walker last night. She just started looking away. Her eyes just started flicking away. I first met Anahit in 2006, and we were taking a year-long course, and I think we were up in some like Sangha place up in Colorado in the mountains, and there was a stupa, the largest stupa apparently in North America, Buddhist stupa on the property, right? And it was interesting. It was a Buddhist retreat center, and we happened to be there. And they would do military marches with Buddhist sayings outside. It was very surreal, the whole thing. Yeah, I don't know, but I've been told, and then it would be something Buddhist. Yeah, it was the Shambhala Center. In the midst of all that complexity up in the mountains, I remember being there, and I was nervous. I was one of very few Canadians, a lot of Americans, some of the most amazing luminary activists that we know, Adrienne Marie Brown, Nyada Mena, we're all in this year-long together, Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, like just superstars. And then this one superstar came up to me, we were doing a pair, and had the coolest freaking boots, because I'm deeply shallow. She's still wearing really great boots. But I remember thinking, oh, I have those boots too. And then we started talking, and this woman who said she was from Canada, but she was luminous and so gentle, and yet there was this feeling of this powerhouse warrior woman underneath this very sweet facade. And I just remember in that moment, Anahit going, oh, I want to connect with you. You got something amazing and powerful and magical. And we became friends in that time, and we've kept in touch and swam in some of the same circles, doing equity work and justice work and leadership work over the years. And now here you are from the other side of the country. So can you say a little bit about yourself and the journey of getting here today before we launch into the book?
Gosh.
Well, hello.
Hello. How would I introduce myself? Anahit, goddess of water in Persian mythology, for those that are interested. I'm CEO of an organization called Animal Leadership. We do equity inclusion work and everything, the A to Z of how to make organizations, communities more inclusive. But I think the more interesting part of me is really the writer part, where I feel very tapped into what it is we're here to be doing. And I think in order for any democracy to be healthy, we need stories that reflect the people of the land. And in this country, we still have a long way to go before we hear the stories that reflect the people of the land. Having said that, I was saying to Suzanne when I arrived here tonight that the whole day has felt like a benediction for me. I started the day at the BC Nurses Union. They had a storytellers conference, and I was doing a keynote, and the people that came up to the mic were 90% were racialized staff of different ages that came to share their story. And that is very unusual in many spaces. And they had different people throughout the day. And then I came over here and I met Brandon, who shared his story of moving from Edmonton, where I also grew up. So there was a shared connection. And I talked to Dax, who's, she is there. I don't know actually how you identify, so I don't want to put pronouns. They. Thank you. And Dax is involved with rejuvenating Chinatown. And as I was driving here, and just last week I watched a movie about, called Big Fight in Little Chinatown, about revitalization efforts to recoup the slow gentrification of Chinatowns across North America. And you're involved in. So I just want to say, a person's story is never their story. Like when we, I think, speak what is most deeply true for ourselves, we connect to the most universally true story that is, is the river running under all our feet. And I feel like I've been tapped into that more in this trip than I felt in recent time, and that has given me a lot of energy and hope I'm going to bring back with me, because it's been a hard time.
You know, even now, Anahid, your use of imagery around connecting the body and the land, you know, even talking about the origin, the meaning of your name. I've been struck, as I think about, as, you know, many of us are, you know, leaning into what does it mean to decolonize what it looks like to lead, to be in community, to be a citizen, to be a neighbor, a family member. The boundary between the head and the body and humans and the earth, I think on that journey it starts dissolving and we start reconnecting. I think about what John Powell says about that the opposite of belonging is separation from ourselves, separation from each other, and separation from the earth. And I feel like so much of your writing, especially in Bones of Belonging and in Breaking the Ocean, your first book as well, is almost like medicine to reconnect us to the earth, as well as us to each other, and us to our stories. Even just now, as you described the river that runs through all of our stories, I'm seeing that incredibly, I feel it in my body as I hear you say these words. Can you say a little bit more about that, about the body, the earth, and the through line of this work that you've been doing for so many years?
I can start on page 1 of the book and just keep going. We'll be here for... well, it's anyone that has read either of the books knows that body is a central character, if you like. And I think any system of oppression thrives on division, as you talked about, where there's a splitting off and the association of what's good with those that are valued, in the case of race, white, light-skinned people, and those that are devalued, associated with negative traits. And the body is part of what's deemed not important, or kind of a side story, or so I'm going to just speak from my own personal experience. If my body had not loudly protested in various ways over the years, and if you've read my books, I talk very vulnerably about body symptoms, deliberately. Everything from struggling with an eating disorder, to incontinence, to severe migraines, to dislocations, recurrent dislocation. And I do that very deliberately because the truest story lives in the body. And current physiological neuroscience research is actually investigating how much information our nervous systems hold. And if you read some of the quantum stuff, they're talking about how the mind does not just exist within the brain, but the mind has a force that goes out beyond. So, you know, we are connected not just through here to what's behind your skull, but there's an interplay. So not to get into all of that too much, but just to say that our bodies are incredibly wise. And my body woke me up pulled me into going deeper and deeper into my story, because I had to. Because I didn't have a choice not to. And I think that every human has early tells of distress when our body is calling for attention. Sometimes it's because something's happened in our own lives. Sometimes it's because something's happening in the collective or around us. But can we listen? And in that listening is the interruption of racism and what it was designed to do, which is keep the division going. So every time we interrupt and connect, move towards connection with our head, mind to body, body to land, human to human, we interrupt the ways our systems have been set up, and the very essence of, I think, colonization as a process. So I still find it more comfortable to be here, but I've learned to take time to go here.
Well, because so much of your writing is almost poetic and it's visceral, and for me it does evoke, it's true, you speak about the body and symptoms, and then you talk about the Canadian shield, or how bark is peeling off birch trees, and your little one, Coda, calls out, "Mama, the bark is peeling away," and you go, "It looks like prayer flags," and then you use that, like you're weaving in and out of these dimensions of metaphor and reality, physical, tangible reality, and then this medicine. And I was just so struck. I don't even read nonfiction really, and I just find myself enthralled reading the pages because it feels like magic. I'm reading about magic, and I'm curious, as you're kind of one of the foremost anti-racism, equity, Jedi, insert acronym or word here. Hey Parker. Educators in our country. There's there's many people here that are educators as well that do this work, and there's often a lot of pressure. And you talk about this to credentialize, and what credentializing looks like in a white supremacist, capitalist, dominant cultures in many countries, U.S., Canada, elsewhere. How have you danced between the credentializing and making the case and being this, esteemed educator, CEO of a company that's very successful, and then accessing the medicine of these reconnecting, words that help to reconnect, images and metaphors that help us reconnect? We're invited into that reconnection. How is that dance for you?
I think they very much feed one another. The reason I started writing is because after being part of equity conversations across sectors for, over 20 years, before I wrote my first book, realizing that you can give the most recent statistics and research and theories to people, and it does not do very much to shift. But create a comfortable environment where people feel able to listen and share their story. And my God, it's like I have been moved and shocked over and over about what shifts and how people remember months later what I or someone else in the group shared that was related to story. In fact, it's coming to mind, so I'll share it. I was doing a session with superintendents of across Ontario. This was a few years ago, and halfway through the day, one of the older male superintendents stood up and shared his story of growing up as a gay boy, having to hide it, and the repercussions and the physical punishment that he experienced growing up, and the ways in which he hid his sexual orientation for years in the board he was in, and the repercussions of that. And it was the first time he was publicly coming out in this group of peers in his life. And I swear that time stopped. And I thought, this is it. I don't need to, we could just end now, and the work has been done. So, I wanted to write stories that would, help people see themselves reflected, because I didn't have that growing up. We see more of those books now, but it's just been in the last 5 years that they're coming to market, and they're still not sold to anywhere near the same degree as white written books are. So let me just be clear on that. So as a plug, please buy a book or copies for friends of yours, because it does make a difference. The amount of freaking energy I've had to put into, even though I would say, the top of my field, is ridiculous. And in fact, I did write an essay on it called Foreign Object, about traveling with my first book and confronting the very, very white world of Canadian literature, and just being shocked at how archaic it was in many ways. So, but also because I think stories motivate change. And so that was the other reason. Sometimes people will ask, how was it to be vulnerable? And I do not like reading memoir where there's where someone hasn't put skin in the game. Please do not waste my time. I want to read, if you're writing something, tell me what is most true for you. Bring me to the edge of what it was that you went through and then whatever. And because when I go to the edge with you, you're changing me in that process as well. So I chose vulnerability as an act of courage because I thought it was important, otherwise I wouldn't have written or I wouldn't have published what I wrote.
Anahid, since I first met you, you've also chosen vulnerability and shared your story. I've heard you do so many times in circles. Now you're doing it to hundreds of thousands and hopefully millions of people that read your book. And I just want to acknowledge that for someone in a white body, I simply cannot know viscerally, experientially in my DNA the experience that a person of color goes through, that an Indigenous person goes through, that a Black person goes through. I can imagine, I can project, I can take moments of my own marginalized identity or experience, growing up poor or growing up, with the mental health issues that my family had or whatever the things are, and I can project and try and extrapolate, but I don't have the experience, and I can't ever have it. All I can use is my empathy and we are exquisitely sensitive mammals if we open ourselves to that empathy, as you remind us. And it's because of leaders like you that have chosen to share their story over and over. I remember a major environmental group who shall remain unnamed, and you and I were talking, and you had just done a session with them, and you were alone. And something came up. You had shared your story so courageously, so vulnerably, and then you apparently the leader of this group said something that completely invalidated, overlooked, glossed over. And you share some stories like that here too. Everything you had just shared, you've basically taken your guts and laid them out for people so that people that were white-bodied could see and maybe have a little bit of a sense. It was so courageous and so generous. And you kind of, in my mind, kind of got slapped in the face. Like it was just like not getting it. And I remember in that moment when you shared that with me thinking, it's just not right, and she shouldn't have to do this alone. But here you are, you're still doing it, you're still writing, you're still sharing your story. And you get ecosystems. As someone who was a campaigner for international water, for all sorts of progressive causes and the environment, you understand ecosystems. You understand inflows and outflows. And so as I was reading this, I was thinking, how is she nourishing her mountains, her oceans, her forests? How are you getting enough sunlight? How do you replenish your nervous system, your body, your soul, to keep generously sharing the stories that you share with people who can only learn really from those stories in terms of that deep medicine?
Gosh, I'd like to hear from the audience on that one. I don't know if I have the answer. Getting better at noticing when the cup is running dry. But what I've realized over the pandemic and this last few years, what's changed in my line of, many of us that do education, facilitation, organizational change, so much more is online. And it has made me realize how much energy I got from being in rooms. Yes, I need a lot of downtime and privacy and just to recoup the writer self, but I felt more alive today than I have in the last few months because I'm too much in my four walls and I'm online on Zoom, and it's just not the same thing. So being in spaces where we are connected to one another in authentic ways is so rejuvenating. I'm going to just, if I can, I want to read just one of the shorter pieces that, just to give you a little taste of, the book is written, there's 10 main stories that each reflect on a different relationship to belonging. So belonging to the land, belonging in an intimate relationship, in a marriage, belonging in one's body, how to reconcile belonging and power, and then there's smaller vignettes in between. So I'm going to read this short vignette called Names, which is one of the first signals that we give to people is, right, whether we get their name right, whether we take time to ask how they pronounce their name, how we remember their name. So it's called Names. It's a furnace of a day thanks to climate change and this being the peak of summer weather. To cool off, the four of us head over to the local outdoor pool to go swimming. We have to check in at reception, a couple of makeshift folding tables first. When we finally reach the front of the line, the teenage attendant asks names in a bored, monotone voice with pen poised to record them on the sheet in front of them. I suddenly get an image of immigration lines at ports of entry into this country about 100 years ago. I always feel a slight tightening inside whenever I'm asked for my name, still. And as a side, for those of you that don't know, I went by Anna from 14 to 28, and it was after 9/11 that I went back to using my full name, Anahid, as a deliberate reclamation. My son Coda, 4 years old, declares in a trying to be helpful and sound like an adult tone of voice, "My mama's name is Anahid. I know it sounds kind of weird, but that's really her name." I laugh while inwardly cringing. From the mouth of babes, not even my own son is exempt from the learned discomfort with names like mine, cultures like mine, ancestry like mine. Anahid is such a common name in Iran, the Middle East, and beyond, but here it bears a stamp of foreigner, outsider, someone to be wary of. We enter the change room and the intensive gymnastics of getting swimsuits onto two hyperactive children quickly chases any memory of my own name right out of my head. Submerging myself in the cool waters of the pool is a welcome relief. I talked to my son later that night. "That hurt me a little bit when you said my name was weird. What's different about my name versus Sally or Rachel?" "It sounds different," he replies. "But for who?" I ask. "I used to go by Anna, but then I realized my real name comes from a place where it represents water and stars, the name of a goddess, a powerful name people used to worship, and still do. It was only when I moved here that people bullied and teased me about it." He squeezes my hand and I continue gently. "People still get it wrong most of the time, but that's okay because now I choose to use it. I'd like you to use it as well." "Okay, Mama," he nods, staring at me solemnly, his brown eyes wide and rounded in his small face. "Thanks, Baba," I whisper. "Time for some hugging." A year later, I arrived to pick up Coda from a play date, and his friend's mother comes out to greet me. "Oh, Anahid," she says, She doesn't get any further because Coda comes out and carefully yet confidently interrupts her. "Actually, my mom's name is pronounced Anahid." I feel a little embarrassed, but also proud. He has overcome his default absorption of the norms around him because of the desire to do better by his mama. As we walk home together, I squeeze his hand in mine, realizing I feel more than just pride or momentary self-consciousness. I feel loved. Sometimes at busy coffee counters, I will still shorten my name to Anna, just once in a while when the line is long and my time is short. If Coda is with me, though, I can't get away with it. "Your name is Anahid," he'll admonish, and then loudly correct the barista as well. He has become my name guard, on the lookout for occasions where I may be slighted or minimized through the mispronunciation of my birth title. I relish how my child self is now protected by my own child, his generation learning from and correcting the erasure mine faced. Names are the first signal as to whether and how much we are welcomed anywhere. My son reminds me that a key measure of belonging will be when all names matter.
And I was thinking about how so many of us have done the session or the workshop on microaggressions, what they are, why they're bad, what to do about it, how to do good feedback. I mean, as educators, and just reading that, wouldn't that be incredibly powerful if that was just required reading? We don't need to do, maybe the whole course, just read that. And then get it. There's an example, and then we get it. It lands so deeply. And it's full of love and hope and all the ingredients of the medicine that you offer. I think about your quiet, loving firmness in that story with Coda, and how you show up as a mama, and how you encourage the power and strength he has, the agency he has as well to become your name guard. And then you have a chapter in there, and it reminds me of a tarot card. I don't know if anyone reads tarot cards, and the Rider-Waite deck, which was painted by a woman named Pamela Smith in the 20s. There's an image of a woman, white woman, and a lion, and she's just bending over with her dress and prying open the huge lion's massive jaws, just very gently with her hand. And it made me think of lion taming, and the power that you bring into your work with all the layers and the strategy with which you do it, and the discernment in how you do it. Can you say a little bit about lion taming?
I can. I think when we're wounded by systems of oppression, and I'll speak for myself, it is easy to get seduced into the victim role. And there is, of course, a truth to that, of swallowing microaggressions for some of us, because there's many different forms of racism, overt oppression, and to lose in that process recognition and access to the powers that we do have. And I even think experiencing oppression even gives certain superpowers that others don't have, which is an edgy thing to say, but I think that that is true. And the lion taming story was, there was an article published in the Sun newspaper in Toronto the day before I was going in to speak to a group that were readers of the Sun newspaper, caretaking staff in an area outside of Toronto, so very much the group. And it was a hack job, and my photo was plastered there, and it was, I don't know when the timing was, but there was a lot of sort of Islamophobia and pictures posted of people's kids in classrooms and just weird stuff happening. And I was really, I got 2 hours of sleep, and I was really, I can feel nervous sometimes, but I felt scared. And the story arcs, because what I realized over the course of the day is the group wasn't the lion to be tamed. In fact, there was honesty and there was very forthright conversation. The lion was the organization, the institution that just had no idea how to hold, had no little awareness of equity deserving groups and racism and what that looks like. And even though I mentioned the article at the beginning of the day, and the only comment the white woman client representative had at the end of the day was, when I sat down and I looked at her waiting for words of affirmation, you've been, that was so well done, and you got the group to this place of, deep conversation. The only comment she had, I kid you not, was, I think you could have held the mic a little bit closer to your mouth. Honest to God, excuse my language, but fuck. I just realized and she actually did read the story and called me 2 months ago to apologize because she recognized it. Be careful, obviously I used, but it was, oh my God. Anyway. But I realized that, the lion, the fears we have are not necessarily the fears that, represent what's really kind of the threat. And even then, we all have, I think, the ability in any situation the resources are there. If we can slow down and give ourselves time to pick them up, the resources are always there to move through whatever's in front of us. And the resource in that moment after that happened, anyway, just there was a connection with one of the participants that had asked a really challenging question where in this white man who read the Sun newspaper, I saw myself reflected, a part of myself, and that was really powerful. So not always, it's just, I've learned to just be really open going into, and I think that's part of the work we all need to do, especially if we're working to undo racism, not to go into a room polarized not to see perpetrator victim. It's so much more complicated than that, and we all contain multitudes, and we all have unlearning to do. I have unlearning to do around ableism and trans identity and even anti-Indigenous racism. Others, none of us have the righteousness to stand on a soapbox and think we're done on this journey to opening doors of access to others that we're walking the path alongside. So I think there's the work. How do I show up holding the whole?
And to do that takes carving out a bigger space sometimes, to hold those multitudes, to be able to see and hold more, to be able to see. When mammals are really stressed, we get tunnel vision. We can only see what's right in front of us. And I think what you're calling us to do in the discernment you talk about, the battles that you pick, and also the empathy you bring without going into acquiescence. It requires a larger container. What are some of the lessons that you think nature, that you think your own story teach us about carving out a bigger space so we can hold more nuance?
Well, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I do think part of the inner work is discerning what is past and what's present. And I think about the direct action training during the civil rights era, and how, Rosa Parks trained for months and alongside other activists for months and months and months to unhook from triggers of oppression, to be able to access her own power, to sit at the back of the bus and hold her space. And I've seen, and I know I've done this, and I see other people do this as well, it's so easy to use activist ideology to justify our own wounding and project and get angry at others in the space. But if we're in a bridge building role, or if we're in a role of wanting to build community, we have to do work, bring a little bit more discipline to not being lazy in that way, because that's the easiest thing to do. It's much harder to see the humanity in somebody when they are saying something that is either overtly or subtly racist in the group. And how do you respond without dehumanizing that person, without pushing them outside the group? That has been learning how to do that, working with myself, holding space in the room has been a very deep practice. And I've had to do a lot of my own healing to be able to do that. But I think a lot of folks of color have to do that healing work if we want to be effective at creating social change. Should we go to Q&A? I just feel like...
I do want to ask you, I just on that note, yeah, it feels right. But first, if I just feel like you're heading in the direction of also the path forward. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share one more about the future and the path forward as we try and hold more complexity and nuance and the rigor, and also for some of us the allyship, so people aren't bearing so much disproportionately of these systems that we're in.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to be clear, I'm not in any way saying that the onus lies upon people of color and white dominant systems to do the work so that we can be more appeasing or nice or friendly or non-threatening, not at all. I'm just saying that we're more effective at creating social change if we do our inner work. We are more resourced, we can put our boundaries in place more quickly, and we are more powerful when we speak, because we're not waiting for affirmation from the other side. So that's where I'm coming from. I think the path forward is we need a hell of a lot more spaces in our institutions and communities to have conversations across divides. After George Floyd, where some of that conversation was happening more, but it quickly got shut down. And what I see, and I'm very concerned about it, is policies are being put in place. So I'll use school boards as an example. There's really strong equity policies in place, like thank God they're there. But what they're not doing, they haven't invested in a process to train school board administrators to know what the hell they're doing. So situations are happening in school and teachers and principals are getting policed without ever having had access to a single equity training. Well, that's a system failure. And if you police somebody before you've taught them and given them space to, how do we learn? We learn by making mistakes and getting corrected and making mistakes and getting corrected. As long as somebody's willing to learn, we keep them in the pool. That process has been shut down. And I think it has fed into the polarization that's happening where talking about race, white people are terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing, so they're not saying or doing anything. I got an email 2 months ago from somebody that went through our whole inclusive leadership certificate, a year-long process to say, I really want to do more around equity, but I am afraid I'm going to lose my job. So I'm stepping back. And I thought, honest to God, I understand in some situations why you would choose to do that. So there is a role for advocacy and a role to really kind of hold people to account and use the hammer. But in many organizational environments, we need to do a lot more to educate people to bring them along into what equity means, what it looks like, how you operationalize it. And that is being shut down. And I'm worried about it. And I'm seeing how polarized things are. And I trust that we'll ride through this time, but this good or bad, the binary, you're a good person, you're a bad person, you're a perpetrator, you're a victim, has never been so, and it is, I just don't see us, the work is not getting advanced, let me put it that way. Because when we're afraid, we shut down and we don't act, we freeze. And so fewer people are acting than I saw a couple years ago.